and check to Louise O'Reilly.
I want to begin by welcoming the bill before us this evening. It will have the support of myself and my party going forward. It's my understanding that this bill seeks to provide greater support to the victims of sexual violence, something which is very much needed and much sought after. It will allow those victims who have been subjected to sexual assaults and gender-based violence and violence in close relationships to be afforded free legal advice, allowing them to receive the best advice on how they should proceed in both a legal and a personal sense. Sexual assault, or any crime of a sexual nature, is a very serious crime and one that should carry one of the highest penalties. I need not go into the details of both the psychological and the physical scars that assaults leave on victims. While not perfect, the law around sexual offences is ever-changing, but we can and we should do much more in our efforts to protect victims of sexual offences, be that in their treatment by the courts or in increasing funding to services to deal with the victims of such crimes. And I would include the services of the Sexual Assault Treatment Unit in that. I had the very great honour of representing some of the forensic nurses working in that service. The service that they provide is invaluable to the victims, first and foremost, yes, but also to members of An Garda Síochána. More broadly, it is important that the Gardaí are recording data accurately, as it has a knock-on effect on the wider system and how we, as a society, deal with offences, in particular sexual assaults. There are issues in the Gardaí about the culture and understanding of the importance of accurate data, that the current system being used by An Garda Síochána is not fit for purpose, and that their IT systems are in dire need of upgrading. This matter was also touched on by the Commissioner on the future of policing. The Minister must address this as a matter of priority. Sexual offences are especially intrusive, inherently violent and leave long-lasting damage. Legal support for anyone who is taking a case is vital, and as the bill states, it is welcome that this would be at the expense of the Minister. According to An Garda Síochána, we've seen an increase of 20% or so in the reporting of sexual assaults in 2017, and the latest publication of CSO figures confirm this spike. And I would echo the questions that you asked, and I would be interested to know if that is in relation to a media campaign or what it is that's driving it. But again, more research is needed in this area, because if we could figure out what we're doing to encourage victims to come forward, well then, you know, and I sincerely hope that it isn't the result of an increase in sexual-based violence. The recent spike is concerning. It could be that the offences are actually indeed on the up, as I have said, but it also may be the result of more people coming forward, and that's something that I think we do need to examine objectively. Neither is very positive, as one sexual offence is one too many, but we do wish to see more cases reported, and it is welcome that people should feel encouraged and safe to report, given the extent to which sexual offences generally go under-reported. A better and more comprehensive approach to reform of sentencing where it relates to sexual offences in relation to sentencing guidelines. I understand these will be brought forward in the Judicial Council bill, and I would ask that the Minister would let us know where that is at, how quickly he expects it to be brought forward, given the clear public appetite that there is for such guidelines. It is vitally important that the public have confidence that the courts will hand down appropriate sentences that are proportionate to the crimes committed. Unfortunately, very often that is not the case. There are wide disparities in a number of areas, including sexual offences. Some sentences have drawn considerable comment and indeed, if I might go so far as to say, anger from some quarters. The bill would certainly go some way to giving those affected the best advice available to them before proceeding with any trial, but they must also have the confidence that justice will be served when the case is done. The reform of how trials are conducted is something which I know the Department are currently exploring, and my party are very much looking forward to working constructively with the Minister for Justice in this regard, giving the best supports possible to any victim who is taking a case to court. Time and again we have seen sentences handed down that are quite frankly inadequate. There are undoubtedly issues relating to inconsistency, leniency and light sentences. Research conducted on judicial sentencing habits has shown sentence lengths ranging from 14 days to 5 months in an assault case, while for a theft case sentences range between 30 days and 9 months, and in road traffic and burglary cases between 2 and 12 months. As a result, the public does not trust the justice system to deliver punishments that fit crimes. As legislators, we have a duty to address what is a considerable issue in relation to sentencing. It is my party's belief that collating, publishing and ensuring judges have these parameters is the very best way to ensure consistency in sentencing. Domestic violence is a crime that is repeated day after day, night after night, often for years and in some cases for decades. We often express shock and outrage about one-off incidents when violence is inflicted on a victim, and rightly so, but we should never turn a blind eye to domestic violence. Why do we have an inherent tolerance for sustained attacks on human beings just because the violence occurs behind closed doors or because it is initiated and inflicted by a perpetrator who is known to the victim? What does that say about society and us as legislators? I note the Domestic Violence Bill was a welcome step in the right direction by this government, but more must be done to protect those who find themselves in such a situation and to tackle the culture of silence that surrounds such crimes. The lack of alternative accommodation is one of the biggest barriers faced by victims. This ranges from the shortage of refuge beds to the lack of transitional housing to spiralling rents. Women and children who are fleeing domestic violence must be exempt from the red tape and bureaucracy that surrounds housing applications. The woman may be the joint owner of the house, but if she is fleeing for her life, then she can hardly call it her home. To this end, all housing officers should have domestic violence training in order that they truly understand the dangers and dynamics of the situation of the woman who is sitting before them. Gardaí must be allowed to apply for out-of-hours barring orders to an on-call judge. The return date will be the next sitting date and the nearest available court. This would enable those victims of domestic violence to be protected out of hours. It would strengthen the powers of An Garda Síochána, who are often trying to deal with domestic violence without having the legislation they need to do the job they want to do and to ensure the safety of victims. I hope that this legislation can go some way towards that. Gardaí must be empowered to deliver safety and barring orders as a matter of course. The practice of the person who is suffering the abuse having to deliver the order to the perpetrator is absurd. We know that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she is trying to leave. The practice of the perpetrator, who could be barred from the house having unsupervised access to children, is nothing short of terrifying. It is imperative that the risk posed by the perpetrator of domestic violence to the children of the family and the impact of such abuse on them is assessed, and that immediate interim measures are taken to protect children. I understand that although we have barring or restraining orders, they do not cover contact being made by the abuser, and although this is in a way harassment, I believe no contact orders could be a better way of legislating against this harassment. I am aware of a particular example that was in the media recently which showed us how victims could be consistently contacted by their abuser and how the abuse will not be in breach of any law despite it being a form of harassment and potentially quite intimidating to those on the receiving end. The Domestic Violence Bill was probably the best place to deal with that, but I know that stakeholders were keen to get it across the line at the time, and this issue was not prioritised as a result. The Women's Aid Impact Report highlighted the barriers and the dangers women face when trying to leave an abusive partner, including inconsistent decisions and responses from the legal system and the Gardaí. We must endeavour to ensure that all victims of domestic violence are protected adequately going forward, and the establishment of such an order could only complement existing protections. Most importantly, this legislation must be underpinned by additional resources for frontline services, and it must serve to act as a complement to current services. Sinn Féin supports this legislation. We acknowledge the work of the deputies who are bringing it forward here tonight, and I would, with just a few minutes remaining to me, like to make a point in relation to the language that we use, because we are all talking about victims, and it seems that sometimes in here we are capable of being very kind in our language, of being very kind in particular to women in the language that we use, and we'll hear it here this evening in relation to women. And then in the blink of an eye, we can be extremely judgmental and harsh in the language that we use, in particular in relation to women. I think we saw it during the course of the debate on the referendum. I think it showed a double standard in here that didn't reflect very well on us. So if we are going to have a conversation about supporting victims of crime, and in particular women who have been victims of crime, as I know they represent the majority in this, I think we need to be mindful of our own language. So when we say we should not be judgmental, If a woman has been raped, we shouldn't. Absolutely, we should not be judgmental of that victim, and we should give her all of the support and the services and the care that she needs, and we should not judge her for the choice that she will make about her own future. As I have said, I commend those deputies who have brought this legislation forward. Sinn Féin looks forward to working constructively with both the people bringing forward the legislation and the Minister. Go on,
Next